It's August 10th, 2001. This is Elizabeth Townsend. This is I was preparing for Lies in the Law Project, and we're interviewing Judge Steven I knew I was going to mess it up, Villarreal. And his spouse, Susan Villarreal. All right, we're going to start with the first easy question. I just heard some of this downstairs because you were at the spouse presentation, but why did you, what made you decide to go to law school, and was it what you expected when you got there? And for each of you, and then we'll go on to other questions.
Well, I wish I could say something real profound about why I decided to go to law school, but I grew up in a mining town, and I never really had much contact with lawyers in that mining town. In school, the students who were fairly good students were directed into engineering and not law or medicine or anything like that. And but there was this lawyer down in Clifton, about 7 miles away from where I grew up, and his name was Lloyd Fernandez, and he later became the county attorney. He later became the Superior Court judge there, and then even later he became the Court of Appeals, or a Court of Appeals judge down here in Tucson for Division II. And I'd see his name in the paper when I was young, a lot. And it seemed to me like he was involved in a lot of timely issues. I just got the impression that he was really a mover and a shaker. And so I thought, well, geez, maybe lawyers are movers and shakers, and that sounds like it might be interesting and something I'd like to do. And so that's really how I developed. That's how the seed was planted in my mind about going to law school, because I was influenced by Lloyd Fernandez, and so that's how I got involved in the law, and I'm glad I did. In retrospect, when I look back, there are so few people from this mining town that I came from, which is Morenci, Arizona. There are so few people from those mining towns who get directed into the law, because you don't have role models up there, and there's only maybe one or two lawyers up there. So very few students from up there get exposure to lawyers and exposure to the law. So it was sort of roundabout how it happened to me, and I'm glad it happened, because I really do feel like the law is my niche. I feel very comfortable in the law, and I think I have a certain amount of maybe natural instinct or intuition that really helps me out. It helped me out a lot as a lawyer, and it helps me out a lot now as a judge. So I just think it's something that's very suited to my personality.
And did you find that your thoughts that you were going to get involved with timely issues and with be sort of the mover and the shaker that you thought it would be, that was what it did turn out to be? Your sort of thoughts before you got here? Was it what you thought it was going to be? Or, I mean...
Yeah, very much. I mean, but, when I got into the law, it wasn't so much because I was thinking, geez, I want to be a mover and shaker so much. I was attracted by the fact that this lawyer was someone I considered a mover and shaker, and I thought that the kinds of things he did were important because I would read about him in the newspaper. And so it wasn't so much that I wanted to be a mover and shaker. It was more that I wanted to do something in life that had an effect on people, that was important to people and important to their lives. And in the actual practice of law, I think I did. I was involved in a lot of interesting cases that were really important to people in their lives. And some of the cases had an effect on, we made law on some of these cases in court. And some of the things that I did while I practiced law, I think, far exceeded anything that I dreamed way back when I was growing up in Morenci. So what the law has given me is a means to fulfill my greatest expectations, a means to accomplish beyond my dreams. So for me, it's been a real challenging career, but a very satisfying one, and I'm glad I made the choice that I made so many years ago to get into law.
I have a bunch of questions, but why don't we go to you?
It never occurred to me to go to law school. I grew up, of course, we're both from Grimley County, and grew up in a small town, 53 students in my graduating class. And I was the valedictorian, and never got 1 ounce of career guidance. And I remember my best friend, she was salutatorian, we're standing at the top of the high school steps, and we're trying to decide what are we going to do after high school. And she says, I think I'll be a special ed teacher. I said, that sounds like a good idea. So that's what I went to college to be. And when Steve told me, this was when he was our senior year in college, and when he told me he wanted to go to law school, it was like, where did that come from? You know, and I was just totally astounded because he'd never shared that with me. I said, well, go for it. And so as he went through law school, I was helping him study and helping do his flashcards, you know, giving him the answers, and I really liked it. But we wanted to start a family, and I saw how much time it took for him to study, and I wasn't willing to do that and raise a family. So we waited, and I was teaching school, which was perfect because I had the summers off, I had all their holidays off, and it came to a point where I was getting very discouraged with teaching. Quintessential middleman. I was the department chair of a local high school, chairperson of a local high school, and had all the responsibility and very little control, and was getting very discouraged in teaching, and I wanted to try something different. And that's when Steve said, you know, you could go to law school now. The girls are old enough. They don't really want you around. And so I thought about it for the whole year, the whole school year, and decided I was going to give it a try. I knew I wanted to do something different, and so I didn't get accepted to law school because at that time I think there were about 1,300 applications. And so I knew the chances were slim, but I was only willing to go to Tucson because I was not willing to sacrifice my family. And lo and behold, I got in. And what it's meant to me is it made me a lot smarter, I feel. I mean, my brain grew really big. I had gotten sloppy and lazy teaching school, and I really learned to study, concentrate, problem solve, and I loved it. I loved the challenge. And it was hard. Going a big brain is very painful. And but it can happen to you even when you're, you know, in your late 30s going to law school.
Then when you got out, what kind of law did you practice?
When I got out, I didn't practice law. I went and worked for a federal judge, Richard Bilby, and as his law clerk. And he asked me to stay on to handle a multi-district litigation case to kind of finish it up. And so I worked for him, and it was perfect for raising the kids because my only enemy really was the calendar. And so I could juggle that, and if I needed to go do a teacher conference or whatever, I could take off during the day. I didn't have to worry about billable hours. I didn't have weekend work. And so it really was perfect. And I worked at the federal courts for 8 years. And then I went into private practice as a solo practitioner in the area of estate planning. And I really love it. I love having the autonomy of my own schedule and whether I want to accept a client or not, and it's great.
So you both have done, I mean, it's really quite a unique, I mean, not unique, but it's kind of a cool situation where you both know the courts, I mean, as a judge, as working there 8 years, you both know each other's worlds in so many different ways. Do you think can you talk about, like, that part of it to students and sort of, I mean, let me think of a better way to phrase that, but it's just a really fabulous, I mean, it seems like it could be really good, but is there I mean, I don't know, you could just talk about it. I'm just muddling on, but do you want to ask a more specific question than that?
No, I think I understood your question, Elizabeth. You know, it really has enriched my life, and when I practiced law, it enriched my practice, and now that I'm on the bench, it enriches my experience on the bench, that I'm able to talk with Susan about cases and issues and the law, and we can share those, we can share opinions and share ideas, and that has been something that I have found to be very satisfying. We have interests outside of the law. I don't want to make it sound like all we ever do is talk about the law, and we have interests outside of the law, and I'm glad we do, and I think it's really important for people to do that. But it really is special for me to be able to discuss a legal issue with her and get her perspective on things, and that perspective has helped me out so much, both when I was practicing law and now that I'm on the bench. So it's really been exciting for me that my wife, who was a teacher for a long time, became a lawyer, and I think it helped us become even closer. And it's not that we weren't close before, we were. We've always shared each other's lives. But it just gave us another area of commonality. And it's just really helped, I think, cement the relationship. And I really respect her opinion, her legal opinion, her legal insight, her analytical ability. And we discuss cases, we discuss broad legal matters, and it's just really, it really has been wonderful that I could do that with her. So it's been great for me.
I think having both of us be in the judiciary at different times, and then in private practice at different times, we are able to understand what the other's going through, and to respect the stresses of being a judge, because responsibility is very great, and you have a lot of power, and using that in a way that furthers justice is paramount. And so it helps that both of us have been through that, so we can understand that responsibility. And now I can understand that responsibility that he's going through. And similarly, he understands now the stresses that I go through with private practice. And I think that makes us a better couple. Law does not consume our lives. I mean, we'll discuss something maybe over dinner or something, but not all the time, because we have other interests and we have other things in life that we enjoy doing. And so we don't let it consume our lives, which I was concerned that it might, but it doesn't happen. It hasn't happened.
Can you talk, both of you, about more about the stresses of sort of what you do now or what you did before, and sort of the different kinds of stresses and sort of how you deal with those stresses?
Well, I was in a private practice of law for about 19, close to 20 years. And one of the biggest stresses that I had all the way through the practice of law was the financial stress of making overhead, of arranging loans when you need them. For example, I was in a practice where we focused on representing plaintiffs in personal injury cases. It's very expensive to prepare these cases and to try them. And most lawyers that represent people who are seriously injured in accidents and other events have to line up loans. You have to line up lines of credit, because the practice of personal injury law is, by its nature, it's very much feast or famine. You may go through a period of a year and a half, 2 years, when you don't get a recovery or settle a big case, and during that period of time you're working on other cases and you don't have a lot of cash flowing in. You have to be able to pay yourself something. You have to be able to pay your employees, and so you have to arrange loans, lines of credit. So for me, dealing with those loans, those lines of credit, during the time that I practiced law was very difficult, because for me, borrowing money is very difficult. I'm a very conservative person, and I think I've always thought that you borrow money only as a last resort, and when you have no other choice. And so it was very hard for me. It became apparent early on that it was a reality of that sort of a practice, that you have to have access to money so you can work your cases. And so that means, unless you're independently wealthy, it means borrowing money and going out on the line, putting your house on the line so you can borrow money so you can fund your cases. And so it was hard for me to come to grips with that, and I struggled with that throughout the whole time that I was in the private practice of law. Fortunately, I was always able to stay on top of my cases and make ends meet and pay off loans and pay off lines of credit, and I was very fortunate in my practice of law. So everything came out great. But that was one of the biggest challenges of being in private practice as a personal injury lawyer for me.
It seems like that would be stressful. I mean, stressful on both of you. Financial stuff is always so stressful that to have that as part of your, just a constant of a practice would just seem like very wearing and very, I mean, I don't know, how did you come up with strategies on how to deal with that kind of stress? Or
Yeah, what I started to do, about the second year that I was in the practice of law, the private practice of law, I was never really in any sort of regular exercise program. I mean, I used to play racquetball here, or go on a hike there, but I never really was involved in any structured program of stress reduction. But Susan, my wife, started to run after our second baby, our last baby. And so she encouraged me to do it, because she thought it was so good for her to get out there and run, and it was a good release for her, and it also helped with the weight control. And so she recommended it to me. She said, "Why don't you come out with me and we'll start running? You know, we'll run." And at first I said, "Run? Why would anybody want to run when they didn't have to, or somebody wasn't chasing them, you know?" But she got me out there, and I started to run, and I loved it, and it really helped me with dealing with the stress of the practice. And so that was one of the main things that I did, and I continue to do now, is I continue to run, because for me it's a huge release. And it's something that I do for myself. When I'm out there on my run, this is time that I'm setting aside for myself, and it has so many benefits. And so that's what I did to help me deal with that stress. But there were many nights when I'd wake up at 2 o'clock at night, and we would be $75,000 into one case, for experts and everything else. And maybe we only had another $10,000 left on our line of credit, and I was wondering, you know, you're sick with worry about, are you going to have enough money to resolve the case and be able to pay off those loans, or are you going to flame out in glory and bankruptcy? And so, I mean, there were many nights that I'd wake up in a cold sweat, worrying about that and thinking about that. So it helped that Susan and I could talk about those stresses and talk about those pressures, and she understood the stress, and she understood why the stress was there, and why the cases demanded that sort of risk. And she was always willing to take that risk with me. And so we took a lot of financial chances risks during the time that I was practicing law, but they were calculated risks. They were risks that we weighed very carefully and thought about, and decided that the benefit was worth the risk, and we always came out ahead. We were very fortunate that we always came out ahead. So how I dealt with those stresses was by running, and by discussing those areas, those issues with my wife, and coming up with a strategy for dealing with that risk, and with the need for those loans.
How did you deal with the stress of that situation?
Well,
Did you feel stressful?
we grew up in a mining town. Morenci and Clifton, both mining towns, and realized that every 3 years they had to renegotiate their contracts, the union contracts with the copper mine. So your life kind of went in 3-year increments, and from when we were born until we left, we always knew we had to prepare that there might be a strike, and in fact there were a couple of strikes, and you had to get through the strike. So what families did was they squirreled away money in anticipation that a strike might occur, and so that's what we did. When we knew that we could do this, we had to get, there were going to be peaks and valleys, and to get through that valley there, you had to squirrel away some money. And as we said, we took calculated risks. They didn't take every case that came through the door. If you're going to spend, $75,000, $100,000 in costs on a case, you have to really evaluate and be sure that it's going to be a successful case, and that you're going to recover something. The practice of law would be great if you didn't have to make money. And so that's stressful. When you're in private practice, You know, you always have to meet that overhead. It's always there. And be able to pay your malpractice insurance, which is high. But again, running, jogging for us is worked. We both run a marathon, and so that takes a commitment. I'm trying to think what else. Another thing about the practice of law that's stressful is that your clients are not always going to like you. There's going to be some clients that are going to be wonderful. They're going to be so appreciative. And others are going to look at you and say, I'm in this pickle here, I'm in this problem, and you're the easiest target. I'm going to resent the money I pay to you because it's taking away from me, and even though it's not your fault and you're doing a fantastic job, I'm going to resent you. And you just have to realize that that's where these people are coming from, and that it's not your fault. You can't take it personal, and you have to still do, your job and help them out.
What about in the judiciary for both of you? What kind of stresses are there?
Well, the stresses are altogether different in some respects, but same in others. Right now I'm working in juvenile court, and every day the decisions that I make impact the lives of families and children, and could impact their lives for years or for the rest of their life. Before I went on the juvenile bench, I was on the civil bench, and I worked on personal injury cases and medical malpractice cases and contract cases and cases that deal with a lot of money. And so the responsibility that I have as a judge is profound, and so you always have the burden of that responsibility on your back, and you feel that. I deal with that stress now the same way that I dealt with the stress when I was a lawyer. I exercise, I run, I have a life outside of the law, and that helps. I have interests outside of the law, and that helps a lot. One thing that's different about being on the bench as opposed to the practice of law, for me, and others may disagree, others may have different experiences, is that on the bench, I bear this yoke of my responsibility while I'm in work, and while I'm on the bench, and while I'm working on these cases. But when I go home, I can pretty much set aside those burdens now as a judge and not let them consume my life. When I was practicing law, however, I couldn't do that. Those burdens, those responsibilities that I had as a lawyer, the risk, the stresses that I was undergoing as a lawyer, they were of the very nature that you don't set them aside when you go home at night or when you go home for the weekend. So in that way now, for me, the stresses are a little bit different. Now maybe the reason they're different now is because now I have more experience and I'm better able to deal with the stresses. I have more perspective. Hopefully I have a little bit more wisdom because I'm a little bit older. And so it's easier for me now to keep things in balance and keep things in perspective than it was 10 years ago when I was 10 years younger. So maybe that's a factor too. It's just that as I've gotten older and more experienced, I'm better able to deal with those stresses than I could then.
Do you have any thoughts about stress? We'll move on to something else.
Well, I was a federal law clerk, career law clerk for 8 years, and I learned that judges are affirmed, law clerks are reversed. So you don't want to be reversed. And in federal court, the cases are typically, there's a lot more at stake in terms of money. You have your larger corporations. You have attorneys from around the United States, the cream of the cream, and you have those stresses, knowing that you're this, out of law school 1 or 2 years, and you're up against the best, and trying to figure out who's telling the truth and what's the right thing to do. Plus, you're dealing with constitutional issues, and those can be pretty heady. In some very large cases, concerning the state of Arizona and the ramifications of those, and so those can be a lot of pressure on knowing that what you're doing is wonderful, but it could have a great impact on a lot of people.
What do you mean by judges are affirmed, law clerks are reversed?
Well, in federal court, when you do an opinion, they get appealed to the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, and often they'll publish their opinion. And also district court judges, if you do an order, they'll ask for that opinion to be published. So you know that you have to, if you're going to help a judge draft an order, you want it to be impeccable. And that's pressure. And then it goes up to the Ninth Circuit, and you're going to have these 3 judges who are going to look at it, and you would hope that they would quote the insightful district court judge. But that doesn't always happen.
Did you have cases that you worried about or that you were proud of that got into that position in terms of the stuff that you had written?
Oh yes, yeah, I did. And there were things that happened that I was really proud about.
How do you, I'm always I'm not very good at the negatives. I mean, not negative, but hardship part. I know. I always want things to be really positive and happy. Like, I don't want you to remember bad times. But we'll try some hard, talk about sort of harder moments in practicing a law. Clients that maybe you think back on, should I have done it differently, or lessons that you learned from particular hard times, or things that were personally hard to deal with, things that might be helpful to students that they might encounter. A lot of stuff deals with sometimes client counseling in the sense of understanding that there's more to the law than the law, sort of the dealing with clients and things like that. I don't know. You have thoughts about that?
One thing that occurs to me now that didn't occur to me so much when I was a law student, but I wish it had, is that I'm a much better judge, and I was a much better lawyer than I was a law student. In undergraduate school, I got good grades. And I'd work. I had to work for them, but I'd work and I'd get good grades. And when I went to law school, that changed. And that was very hard for me to come to grips with. I was always used to getting A's and B's, and if I worked. in law school, I could work my tail off on a subject and get a C. And that was really disappointing to me when I was in law school. Because when you're in law school, the only measure of your success are grades. See, later on when you get into the practice of law, when you're on the bench, there are a myriad of measures of success. But in law school, the only measure is grades. And everybody focuses on grades. And I'm afraid that I let grades and my lack of good grades affect me in law school more than I should have. And I think that in my own mind, when I was in law school, I was really hard on myself because I didn't get A's and B's. And because everybody was so concerned about grades in law school, I assumed that, well, if I don't get good grades in law school, that must mean that when I get out into the practice of law, I'm not going to be a very good lawyer. And I was convinced by the time I got out of law school that that was the case. That because I didn't have good grades, A's and B's in law review, that certainly I wasn't going to find success in the practice of law. You know, it's like the girl who thinks that she has to look like a model to be pretty. Or the guy that thinks that he's got to have big muscles and play on the football team to be attractive. The same sort of thing. And I think that in my own mind, to some extent, I probably labeled myself a loser. But once I started to practice law, once I got out there and started to practice law, what I discovered was that when I worked at something, the result that I got was usually better than 95% of the people around me. And so that was a eureka for me, because what that told me was that I could be good, I could be successful in the actual practice of law, even though I wasn't a good student. Although for a long time I had told myself that, you know, I was going to be relegated to being just a lawyer working on insignificant cases and never getting any respect as a lawyer. So what I found out over the years, and this is something I try to tell students, is that, look, if you get good grades, fantastic, great for you. If you don't get good grades, don't let that mark you for the rest of your life in your own mind. That doesn't mean that you're not going to be a success as a lawyer. That doesn't mean that you can't go on and be a judge or a successful lawyer. Because what matters in terms of being a good lawyer, more than anything else, are the people skills that you've got. You've got to be able to relate, first of all, to your clients, to understand what their legal problem is. And yeah, you got to have legal skills so you can understand the legal nature of their problem, but you have to be able to draw information from them. And you got to be the kind of person that can do that. And then, if you're in litigation, for example, where you're doing trial work, you have to be able to relate to 8 people or 12 people on the jury at their level. You're not relating to them on a law student level or on a judge's level or on a lawyer's level. You're relating to them on their level. And you know, and typically speaking, your juries are made up of people who don't have college educations, very down-to-earth people who work hard for a living and don't make a lot of money. Those are the kind of people you have to relate to. And so you need skills to be able to do that. And so those skills, you don't learn those skills in law school. Either you got them or you don't. And so what I've learned over the years is that grades aren't important. They're important if you want to get that first job, making $100,000 a year, working for a big law firm up in Phoenix or in Chicago or New York or wherever. And they're important in terms of getting that first job. After that first job, then what matters is how you practice law and your ability to translate legal issues to your clients in a meaningful way, your ability to relate with other lawyers in a meaningful way, to relate to judges, to relate to juries. And so these people skills are much more important. So that's kind of a lesson I like to take to students a lot, is that if you have good grades, fantastic. If you don't, you're not a failure. You could be a very, very good lawyer. And the limits are to your career are endless. So don't place these limits or blocks on yourself because you may not get good grades as a law student. Look beyond that. Look at your skills. What are the things that you're good at? Those things could translate to skills as a lawyer. Probably do. And it's those things that are going to make a difference in your life and in your career. And it's those things that are going to make you a fabulous lawyer.
How long did it take you to come to that view when you said you realized that? I mean, how long did that sort of negative self-image, how long did it take you to get out of that?
It took me about 3 years, because for me, in my first job, I didn't do a lot of trial work in my first job. I worked for a legal aid society, did a lot of poverty law, and you don't get into trial very often, you don't get into court too often. I had sort of flashes of what I could become, though. I saw that I was able to relate to people and got real good results in their cases. But in my second job, where I was a trial lawyer, I'd been hired by the public defender's office, and I was a trial lawyer. That's when it really hit home for me. That's when I saw that I could relate well to my clients, that I got real good results in trials. And when I'd compare my pleadings, my motion work, to that of my peers, it was head and shoulders above theirs. And they may have been good students in law school. And so that was a real eye-opening experience for me. So it took me about 3 years before I began to turn around, before I began to see that, geez, maybe I deserve to be in this profession. Not only that, maybe I'm a decent lawyer. Not only that, maybe I'm a damn good lawyer. It took a while, but I got there. I got to that point. And once you're practicing law and you see the quality of the other work around you, it becomes real clear where you fall in that hierarchy of legal ability, where it matters, out there where the rubber hits the road, in dealing with real clients, being in front of juries, being in front of a judge, being in the deposition where you're on the other side of another lawyer and you're trying to get information.
I have tons of questions on that, but we'll come back to them. I guess we'll go to more, unless you want me to do.
I have 2 points to make.
Good. I figured.
I have 2 suggestions. One, having worked in the judiciary, we would see thousands of pleadings come across. Thousands. And you don't want to have a reputation with the judiciary when your pleading comes across that you can't be trusted. So when you cite a case for a certain proposition, because the judge doesn't have to have a law clerk, the judge may look up that case, and if that case does not say what it says it is, or the case you cited has been reversed, or is an unpublished case, your credibility with the judge is just gone. And then unknowingly, you don't know that, but when you come in for oral argument, you've got a big hurdle to come through. So be sure that your pleadings are accurate and that your citations are accurate. The other suggestion is that you don't have to take every client that comes through the door. And if you have a client that comes in and this client tells you, I want to fire my other attorney, or I've been to 3 lawyers and I've been told that you can help me. Red flags ought to just pop right and left, and you don't have, and even though you've had a lot of rapport with that client and everything sounds hunky-dory and they're ready to write you a check and you've got your rent payment or whatever due, tell them, let me look into your case and I'll get back to you. And then go down and read the court file. And you may decide that this will be a whole lot of problems that you don't need. And so that's the 2 suggestions.
How did you come to that last
Well,
one?
an experience with somebody, with a client. And I don't want to go into too much
Okay.
detail on that.
Let me just ask you, did you come to that advice after the experience?
After the experience, that's why I'm telling you ahead of time, is that if I knew now what I knew then, or whatever it is, if you know, but yeah, I'm trying to impart a little wisdom to help you out so you don't have to go through the same thing.
And do you follow your own advice now when
Oh,
other
yes.
clients come in?
Oh yes, and you're still going to make mistakes. And that just happens. I mean, you think, oh, you've got everything going and you're doing right. Well, some things come up you just can't predict. And so, but you hope that, maybe a little flag will, well, how come there are 3 lawyers that already rejected this person? What else is going on here and this is another thing, your client may not tell you everything. And I had a client who was doing a will and she didn't have any children. And after she died, I found out that she did have a son. And the son died of AIDS. And she had disowned him. But it would have helped me a lot if I had known, And so she wasn't telling me the truth. She was filtering what she wanted me to know. And so you got to remember that your clients are going to do that. They're going to filter what they think that you need to know.
So does it seem like it's a battle? I mean, let's talk more, because you talked about relating to people and all that, so it seems like a good segue. Do you think that in some way it's not a battle, but a struggle, that there's a constant struggle to get the information you need out of your clients? Or how do you, in that situation,
No, I don't think it's
Or is it-
it's always a struggle to get everything out of your client. I think what you need to do is to give your clients the assurance that what they tell you is going to be treated confidential. And I always tell my clients, what you and I say is confidential, and the only way anyone else is going to know about it is if you tell them.
and that's why the confidentiality is so important.
It is very important, yeah.
Um, let's talk more about relating, because you had talked about relating to problems. Do you think your ability to relate to people and their problems is because you're just good at, because of who you are and sort of what you bring to the table, or do you think that there are, like, what is it, how does that translate to someone when they, I'm not making myself very clear, but sort of, we hear that about judgment too. Someone will say, I know that my judgment is really good, and
Yeah.
I don't know how that translates to someone. Like, did you learn it? Did you always relate to people?
I think I've always related to people, but it didn't occur to me how well I related to people until I was in my career. And I think I've always had good judgment, and I think I've always been very intuitive, but I never realized those things until I had the blessing of a little bit of age and perspective, and was able to look at some of those skills that I got that I never gave myself credit for. Some of those things you have or you don't. It's like intuitiveness. That's like talent in sports. I try as much as I would like to. I could never be a Michael Jordan. I could never play basketball that way, no matter how much I practice and how much I committed to it. And it's the same thing with some of these skills that we're talking about, this judgment and intuition. You got it, or you don't. But you can sharpen those skills, and that's what experience does for you. And that's what experience has done for me, is that it's given me the ability to hone those skills, and skills that I didn't even realize that I had. And with the passage of time and working on a variety of cases and getting experience, then you add a layer of experience to that.
So
That good judgment or that good intuition.
how does relating to people help with the practice of law? Why do you need to relate to people?
Well, because first of all, you have to understand what their problem is all about, and you got to be able to be sure you're getting the correct information from them. And they may not be giving you the correct information or accurate information for a variety of reasons. And you have to be able to understand when you may not be getting that. Sometimes it's just a feeling, it's like a gut feeling. You're talking to a client and they're telling you something, just like Susan was talking about a moment ago.
Yeah.
They're telling you something. And afterwards you think, that just doesn't feel right. And then maybe you follow up on it, and you get the true information. Some of it you just a sense, like that feeling that you got. So you got to be able to get information out of people, and it helps to be able to talk to them and to develop rapport with them. They have to like you. They have to feel like you're going to help them out, and so you got to get the facts before you can figure out what the legal problem is and figure out what the legal solution is. So getting the facts and getting them correctly, I think, is critical. And if your clients have a rapport with you, you have rapport with your clients, you're going to get better information. And if, for example, you are doing a jury trial and you've got an 8-person jury out there, it helps to understand what kinds of issues may turn them off and what kind of issues may turn them on. It helps to understand what kind of attitude will turn them off and what kind of attitude will turn them on. And those are things that you can learn to some extent, I guess, but you got to be able to look at people in their eye, and you got to be able to get a sense for where they're coming from, and that's where I think people skills really help. Talking to people, relating to them, being intuitive, being able to read between the lines sometimes when you need to. Those are the things I think are really important.
It seems like if you could get more out of people, then you'd have more you'd understand their problems better and be able to solve them maybe in ways that wouldn't be obvious to someone who didn't spend the time. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's the crux of the whole of a lawsuit, of a legal problem, is getting the facts and getting the information, and the more that you have, the better your ability to decide what the solutions ought to be.
You need to also realize the impact you have, for instance, on a jury. We would often, after every trial, we would poll the jury, and seeing their comments was very enlightening. I mean, they would make one comment that they always realized that it was in a very 5-week long trial in one of these cases, or excuse me, 5 months trial, and they always knew that this one female lawyer was going to come and do some examination of a witness because she'd always wear short skirts, suits. And they made that comment afterwards, that they always knew when she was going to be, on that day. And none of us had ever picked that up. And that the fact that they even noticed. Another time, the jury noticed that the lawyers did not like each other and did not treat each other respectfully, and it made them mad. And they said that the only positive thing they could say was that the lawyers dressed nicely. And so they were really angry at both lawyers. And that doesn't do well for lawyers in general. And what we need to do is to change our image. And little things like that might be the one to do it, is to treat each other respectfully, at all times.
Do you think that they don't now? I mean, do you think that's more common than not, that sort of...
I don't know if Tucson is getting that way. It's possible it could, because as we get larger and you don't know each other, I feel, and I would get that from lawyers when they would come down from Phoenix, totally different.
Mm-hmm.
Very more of the warrior kind of, gladiator kind of lawyer. Here in Tucson, you still may meet somebody and have another case with them. And so, but I think that we're all in danger of that happening if we just don't keep it and try to treat each other respectfully.
Well, on the civil bench, where I spent almost 3 years, and I practiced law in that area for close to 20. Lawyers can sometimes just brutalize each other. The brutality that you see, and that's a strong word, but it can be a very accurate word to describe how lawyers treat each other. It's appalling, but it happens, and maybe it's happening more often now than it used to happen. I think a part of it is that some of the big law firms have huge billing hour requirements. They put huge pressure on their lawyers to generate income. And I think those pressures sometimes translate into incivility, an awful lot of incivility, because what's important to them is to be able to bill and to bring money into the firm, and not so much their relationship with other lawyers or with that particular lawyer or with the bar in general. And so on the civil bench, I saw a lot of that. I'd see lawyers getting into discovery disputes over petty issues and taking a lot of their own time and clients' money and judicial time trying to resolve these petty disputes that never really belonged in court, that lawyers should have been able to resolve by picking up a telephone and talking with each other. And so it's really sad that that there is so much incivility in the practice of law, but it seems to be a fact of life.
What do we do? I mean, is there anything like, as a judge or as a lawyer, I mean, how do you keep the incivility from taking over? I mean, letting the good guys still win, kind of thing.
As a lawyer, you have to be constantly aware of the pressures that are on you and are on the other person, and not be sucked into these displays of machismo, or whatever. It takes a lot of effort in those circumstances to maintain your professionalism, but it's something that's critical. And where this comes up a lot, it's not in open court, because in open court the lawyers have their best faces. Where it comes up, in my experience, are in, for example, in civil cases, in depositions. Because in a deposition, the lawyers are there, they're deposing a witness or a party. There's a court reporter there, but there's no judge there. And so it's in that context that you see a lot of abuses, and that you see sometimes outrageous behavior, intimidating behavior. I mean, these are lawyers, these are officers of the court, and they'll intimidate each other. It's shocking when you see it, and it's easy to be sucked into it when you're there and you're on the receiving end of something like that. So what it takes is just a real strong awareness of the fact that that's what happens sometimes, and you can't get sucked into it. You have to stay professional. As a judge, I have an easier time because it's my courtroom, and I maintain the standards of the practice of law in my courtroom, and I can come down hard, and I have, and I do, on lawyers who are rude to each other, rude to witnesses, rude to the court even at times. And so I think it's incumbent on the judges there to see that sort of conduct on the part of attorneys, to stop it immediately. But I think we need just to be more aware of the pressures that lead to that sort of conduct, and we just need to try to avoid it. And you know, it's funny, here in Pima County, there's a proposal right now before the Pima County Bar Association to have a contest, like every month, to see who receives the rudest letter from another lawyer, and then print the letter and print the name of the lawyer. And so they're actually trying to work out something right now where they can put that sort of program in place, so that lawyers who behave this way, who send nasty letters to other lawyers, get some sort of consequence for it. I mean, we just need to be aware of the fact that this sort of behavior is ugly. It doesn't belong in our profession. It's dehumanizing, and it's rude, and it doesn't further justice in any way. But for a lot of lawyers, they practice law in the culture, in certain law firms, where that sort of behavior is maybe not expressly encouraged, but sort of tacitly encouraged, because on the one hand, we preach professionalism to people, but I've had so many people come and tell me, lay people who want a referral to a lawyer, and they'll say, I need somebody who's really mean. I want somebody, I feel like I'm getting beat up in this case, in this divorce case. I need somebody who can really come down on my wife or my husband, and I want a mean lawyer. And then when they see their lawyers behaving that way, then they feel good. I'm getting good service, and so we have to really discourage that sort of attitude on behalf of clients, and we have to discourage lawyers from falling prey to that sort of ethic. It's horrible, and it dehumanizes everybody.
And from what you say, it doesn't necessarily work. The judges aren't happy with that kind of behavior, and juries don't necessarily respond to it. So it doesn't even further the gains of their clients in some way, the bullying. Or do you think it does, though? Do you think that's why it still is so, and how prevalent do you think the bullying is?
I think it's more prevalent than I would like to have seen. It's not something that happens on a daily basis. It's something that you might run into if you're doing a lot of trial work and you're doing a lot of depositions. You might run into that sort of conduct 2 or 3 times a year. It's out there. And unfortunately it seems to be out there more now than it was 10 years or 15 or 20 years ago. And that's what's worrisome to me as somebody who's practiced law during that period of time.
Mm-hmm.
And if you talk to other people, other lawyers who do litigation, they tell you that the level of the practice of law has been degraded to a great extent by this incivility. And so I think it's a real problem.
I have a question for you. Would you have any comments on that? In the packet that Dean Massau has, she was involved with a class that was sort of like this years ago. One of the subjects that came up a lot was wills and sort of trying to understand what your client wants, and that they may not, that's part of like dealing with people in their states, and sort of planning all that is as much trying to understand their needs and wants. And I thought maybe you could talk, if you had thoughts about that, or that.
I'm not sure what your question is.
My question is, there's a kind of thing of like that, like your thoughts about things may be different than your client's thoughts, and that sort of how, sort of examples of that, or how sort of that kind of thing, that value systems and sort of in terms of, or goals, or life thoughts, or things like that.
When someone comes to you to plan their estate, you have to know very intimate details that many people do not know. You have to know family relationships, and you have to know their financial situation. And so that's why it's very important to develop that rapport of comfort and confidence. And so what I try to do is first get to know them as people, and where they are they moved here, what kind of career did they have, in other words, where are they in the scheme of things, and in their phase of life, and how they feel about certain things, because you have to ask them tough questions about, are they interested in cremation? I mean, this is a tough subject. People don't want to talk about dying. And they have to make hard decisions, so you have to also get used to that it may take a while. it may take, you know, a couple of months to work through this, because they've got to make some real tough decisions on who's going to be their personal representative, who's going to be their financial agent if you're doing a durable power of attorney, or their healthcare agent, or do they want to do a living will, and really, do you know what that means, and what if you don't have it? And so you have to kind of give people time to think through these things. And so what I tend to do is try to get to know them, and then give them suggestions as to, okay, this is what you could do. You could do just this, you could do this, you could do this. Do they have any charitable interests? If they do, they could do this. There's all kinds of things that they could do, and why they would, you know, might be the tax consequences of it, or why they would want to do those things. And then I step back and say, now you need to tell me, because these are your documents, they're not my documents. And I've had people who, you know, sometimes they'll say something that they want to cut out a son, or they want to do something that's a little bit quirky. And so you say, well, now why do you want to do that? And often what they do is they only see the here and now. They don't see, well, what are the ramifications of that? And planning for the fact that their children might predecease them. And if that happens, what do they want? And so it's really a tough process, because they really have to think, you know, in a lot of different ways. And I think that if you're a good trust and wills lawyer, you know you have to predict different eventualities which may never occur, but you got to say, well, this might happen, or that might happen. So it just helps if you really get to know them, and then you just kind of step back, and sometimes you have to let them just kind of think about it for a while. Often I'll give them a state organizer, which they take back and they kind of fill in, or they'll fill in before they come to see me. And that helps them kind of get started in this thinking process.
Mm-hmm.
Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. Are there times when they want to do things that you just think are horrible? And how do you deal with that?
Well, it's not my document. And if it's not illegal, they can do that. I mean, people have a right to screw up their own lives, and if they want to do that, it's their money. And often, kids kind of forget that, you know, the children, they think that that's our money, but it really isn't. You know, so, well, we don't want, you know, mom to give this money away to this charity. Well, it's not their money. And so sometimes they have to be gently reminded, you know, because they'll try to, and you have to watch that, the influence of the kids and things. And so, yeah, that's another thing you have to be real careful about, is who's influencing whom. And if they come in and they're 80 years old and they want to change their will and write their children out, for instance, and give it all to their nurse, then you need to tell your client, do you realize that this could be challenged for this and this, and you know, you have to help them think, have you thought through this? And then if you're really willing to do this, then maybe we should have a, you know, for your protection, if this is really what you want to do, is you should have a psychological exam to prove that you are making a knowing, intelligent decision under no duress or coercion by anybody.
So both of you chose things, plaintiff cases with personal injury, dying and death things that deal with the hard times in life. I mean, there's lots of law that deals with lots of things, but how do you deal with sort of, does that ever sort of impact on your sort of personal philosophy, or are there ever times when it was just too horrible or too hard, or are you able to sort of separate from sort of like the sadness that you sort of see every day in your experiences? And with juvenile courts, I'm sure, as well. It's a lot of sadness.
Yeah, a lot of my clients die.
Right.
You know, and you know, I guess I wasn't really prepared for how many were going to really die quick, you know, and how many hospitals I would have to make emergency kinds of visits to. But yeah, it sure it does. It's different though when it's when a client dies unexpectedly. because in this area of law, you know and you understand, and you have to feel pretty comfortable that, you know, that's the one guarantee you can give your clients, is that we're all going to die. And so you get to that philosophy where you're able to handle it kind of on a different level. But when the client, you know, one of your favorite clients dies unexpectedly, then that's tough. But you know, death is tough. And so that's just part of life.
But I think one of the things that we have to learn as lawyers is that while we're humans and we're still going to be affected by these feelings, and we're going to be sad, we've got to maintain our professionalism, and we have to not let any personal feelings interfere with the job that we do for our clients. And so one thing that comes with experience as a lawyer is the ability to compartmentalize feelings. That's one thing that I learned in my first trial job. I was a trial lawyer at the public defender's office, and I learned out of necessity how to compartmentalize feelings, because if you're appointed as an attorney for a serial rapist, you're not going to like that person on a human level. In fact, you're probably going to detest that person on a human level. But you learn to put...
Wrong.
And so that ability to compartmentalize feelings, I think comes with experience. When you first come face to face with those feelings as a lawyer, you realize that you have to do something about them, and you realize that what you have to do is set them aside and do the best job you can. And you learn how to do that through experience. But I think all lawyers see that. And I think one of the best lessons I came out of that first job with was the ability to set my feelings aside. And I could do that in just about every single case that I was assigned as a lawyer, except child molesting cases. I couldn't do it. And so when I was in private practice, it got to the point where even though I would get clients, because at the beginning of my practice I had a criminal practice for a while, and we would get a lot of clients accused of child molesting, and we did them for a while. But after a while I just told myself, I just can't do it. I emotionally, I just can't do it, so I'm not going to anymore. And I stopped. So you got to know when to draw the line. You got to know what your limits are, and if you're beyond your limits, then you need to get out.
Do you see those kind of cases in juvenile court? Do you see, or is it more hidden if they're being abused?
I see them in juvenile court. It's not unusual for children that are involved in my cases, in my dependency cases, for example, to be molested by their father or by boyfriends, that sort of thing. So I see that a lot. But see, it's different, because I'm not representing the perpetrator. And
That makes a lot of sense.
but it just got to the point where those kinds of cases where I just couldn't represent them any longer, and so I had to stop doing it. And so I think that as lawyers, that can happen to us, where our personal feelings are just so completely involved, either for a person or against them, that you're no longer objective. And so if that happens, then you should not be representing it.
Okay, I'm going to get to a little bit more sort of fluffy questions, or sort of, I'm not very good at phrasing these, so you talked about sort of the place it's had with the two of you and your sort of connection with each other. You've talked about people and sort of the people in law and sort of your connection to law. And I think if we could sort of end on a couple of questions about sort of your belief system or your philosophy or how that connects sort of your personal feelings about sort of why we're here or what we're doing. And that sort of, I mean, if it's too personal, that's okay. I mean, you don't have to, but it's kind of, I guess it's kind of all the talks about death and sort of choices and sort of what you can take and what you can't take. It's that sort of, that more, not spiritual, but sort of that sort of personal space of sort of, what is this all about? And I don't know, I've given you a lot of different ideas. You can take it anywhere you want, but sort of that sort of more, I don't know, that quiet space of sort of, when you think about it all and your life and sort of, I don't know, you can take it any way you want.
Well, I guess when you're a lawyer, you want to make a difference. And so I want to be, when I'm gone, that someone says, you know, she really cared and she made a difference in a lot of lives because she liked people. And so I think that there's many ways you can use your legal degree. And so this is the area that I've chosen because, I mean, I was a special education teacher, and that's working with tough kids, junior high and high school, and tough situations. And yet I'll still run into some of my students, and I ran into one last week, and this has been, 12 years. And so I really like people, and I really want to help them. And so I that's why I chose this area, is that I think it's an area that I can do that. It's got its ugly side, law does. I mean, this can also be an area where you see a lot of greed, and that's not very pleasant. But like Steve was saying, you have to kind of compartmentalize that part of it and really focus on the good and the good that you're doing and the way you're helping people avoid problems or to help them solve a problem, and so that makes you feel good, and it makes you feel like your time on earth here is worthwhile. And if I can take that with me, I think that's great.
I agree. I think that what the law has given me is the ability to do something where I'm having a positive impact on people and on society. And on the practical side, I can still make a living doing it, feel good about what I do. I think that's what I've gotten out of the practice of law. That's what I've gotten out of my involvement with the law, both as a lawyer and as a judge. And it really does sound corny, but I mean, if you can, when you die, if people can say, yeah, you know what, he or she made a difference, and the world was a little bit better because they were here. And it really sounds corny, but that's so true. I mean, that's what I would like to. That's the kind of legacy that I hope that I can leave, is just to make a little bit of difference. And I think that this profession has really given me the opportunity to do that. And I can't think of too many other professions that give a person the capacity to help and at the same time to hurt so many people in society.
Okay, here's our last question. You're finally at the end. Your happiest moments, and for And since you guys have two, I want you, if you don't mind, to do it twice for each of your main things, like when you worked as a, and it can be, and we've run the gamut on what it is. But when you think back, it's like this a happy moment practicing law, or being a judge or clerk.
I think I'm trying my happiest moment. That's tough. But one where I felt very satisfied was a particular case that that dealt with a special education student going to one of the school districts here, and they expelled him. And Judge Bilby had that case, and he found that that they couldn't expel a special education student. They had to provide an alternative education of some type, because if you did that, then all you were doing was putting a child who might be very disturbed out on the street with nothing to do but to get into trouble, so that he ended up in prison. So he made that decision, and the waves went rippling out through Tucson. And the lawyer, the plaintiff's lawyer, went back and testified before Congress. And I remember she came back to me and told me that one of the congressmen there said, there's one district judge in this country that gets it. And that made me very happy.
That's really cool. And how much influence did you have in terms, since you had that background, did you help?
Oh, yes. Oh, yeah. He really relied
I-
upon that. And sure, and to have, and to be familiar with the statutes, the federal statutes. Oh, yeah.
That's really cool.
So, and as a lawyer, I don't know. I just can't think of one on that one. To ponder that.
Okay.
I think probably the happiest moment for me as a lawyer was resolving a case about 6 years ago that was a pretty high-profile case here in Tucson. It involved a girl who had been kidnapped when she was 8 years of age, and she was brutally killed by a pedophile who was on parole from California. And I and my partner worked on this case for years, close to 10 years. Got thrown out of court a couple of times, went up on appeal, got it reinstated. And we had filed a lawsuit against the state of California and the perpetrator. And after this 10-year odyssey, we were able to get a modest settlement for our clients. But what made that case so special wasn't the size of the settlement, but it was just the fact that we helped our clients achieve justice, and that was important to them. That there be some accountability for this horrible act, this horrible thing that had happened to the little girl. And I think that case probably is the one case that made me feel the best about what I was doing, and the happiest that I've been as a lawyer was representing those people in that case. And we didn't make a lot of money. We had a lot of other cases where I made a lot more money, but they weren't as satisfying as that one, because to me that was achieving justice for people who really deserved it. And we fought that case tooth and nail, and we kept them in the ball game, and ultimately we got them justice. And to me, that's what it is to be a lawyer. And so I think that was the happiest I've been as a lawyer, was being involved in that case.
Pretty cool. Any more happy moments, or are we done with happy moments? We're done with happy moments.
It's Friday afternoon.
This is great. We didn't talk about the bridge program or anything like that. I don't know if you want to say anything about that before we finish and your involvement with that, or just leave it at the happy moment stuff.
Why don't we just leave it at that?
That sounds great. Thank you so much.
Thanks a lot. It was really
You're so